Alright, so this video is probably going to be a little bit longer than the ones that I typically make, but honestly, I don't really give a fuck because I want you guys to see this video in its entirety. It's basically Ben Shapiro's entire worldview, this idea that he is a libertarian who cares about freedoms and he's a facts over feelings and a science and a data-driven kind of guy, is completely dismantled by Neil deGrasse Tyson, an actual scientist who's had some, not so great takes in the past, but in this one, he basically completely dismantles Ben Shapiro's ideology surrounding transgendered issues, and in addition to that, just generically Ben Shapiro's entire worldview. So let's hop into this and I'll commentate my way through.
It seems like the left is militating against the advent of science. One of those areas is the area of transgenderism. The argument that is typically made by gender theorists is that gender is entirely separate from sex. You've seen the argument made that it makes no difference on average if men are stronger than women are, and that if we were to allow transgender women to compete with non-transgender women, then this would somehow not disadvantage biological women. And this seems to me absolutely ascientific, that if we were actually going to have a discussion about gender and sex, that should be based in data, which suggests that mammals are in fact binary in terms of their sex, unless you have intersex birth defects typically, or genetic defects.
I'm happy to.
Just pause for a second and listen. I'm not somebody who typically likes to make fun of anybody's appearance or anything, but Ben, dude, you stand at 5'7", and you're talking about, and you're this tiny little squeaky voice dude, and you're talking about how there's this rigid boundary lines between females and males in correspondence to their athletic ability, their strength, etc. Dude, you are like a perfect example of how there is a wide spectrum of physical attributes and abilities with these athletic events, and he's portraying this entire thing as if it's something that's so easy to determine and categorize. Men have these attributes, women have these attributes. Meanwhile, I know 50 women in my own personal life that could outlift and outrun and outcompete Ben in all of these athletic competitions. So it's just ironic and funny to me that Ben Shapiro, of all people, is pretending as if there are these easily identifiable rigid boundary lines athletically between men and women. But continue.
Opine on this. This only matters because today we segregate nearly all sports by gender. Otherwise, why do you even give a shit? what someone identifies with? So we live in a free country, and with consenting adults and people free expression of who and what they are.
On an adult level, I agree with you. I think it doesn't matter what you teach children.
Saying. And so there's the matrix of what you are biologically, how you express yourself, who you choose as a sexual partner. If we actually live in a free country, as we tell ourselves, people's freedom to behave in any of those ways should not concern you at all.
Should not concern you at all, Ben. So why are you hyperfixated on this problem every day of the week? I mean, that's a great way to phrase this. And honestly, we as American leftists or socialists specifically need to take some lessons here from Neil deGrasse Tyson and start using some of the rhetoric that the right uses against us, against them. Okay, the freedom and democracy rhetoric should belong entirely to socialists in this country. Okay, the conservative agenda is completely against democracy. Okay, look at all the voting rights, the anti-voter rights and voter suppression bills that Republicans are passing all across the country right now. They don't support democracy. Actual democracy means that they lose power. That's how this works. They are against democracy. So we need to steal that rhetoric from them. In addition to that, the freedom side of this. Of course, socialists support freedom. This is one of the main tenets that Karl Marx based his entire ideology around, was freedom. He wanted people to be free from the constraints of having to work in this wage slavery type of system that we have right now. And even just in a modern sense, in our current political system here in the United States, freedom from things like crippling medical debt. Why is it that we have 500,000 medical bankruptcies a year in this country? Is that true freedom? Is it true freedom when you have to go to work and spend a majority of your waking life working for somebody else when you have no say in that system whatsoever? That's not freedom. Freedom is democracy in the workplace. Freedom is having a say in, again, something that occupies a majority of your waking life in your workplace. That's actual freedom. That's actual democracy. And the right does not support those things at all. So we got to steal that rhetoric from them, like Neil deGrasse Tyson did here.
Nor are they requiring that you behave that way. Okay, this is for their own freedoms, because we live in a free country. Now, what is unresolved here is, what do you do with sports? It's unresolved. And I follow that closely, and I don't see any meaningful solutions to come down off of that. We know that hormones manifest differently in different people, and there's the whole thing with steroids. Steroids are hormones, right? And we rallied against steroids in professional sports because it gives you an undue advantage. So I've tried to think of what the future of sports would be. in the world of a gender spectrum. And it may be, you don't specify whether it's a male or female sport. You just take measurements of what your hormonal balances are. And so you compete based on your hormonal. This is thought I had. I mean, I don't know. I don't know where it's going to land.
All right, so listen, I mean, this isn't his area of expertise. It's not my area of expertise either by any stretch of the imagination, but I don't know that I necessarily like that idea of stratifying or categorizing these athletic competitions based on hormonal balance. We just saw a couple examples just recently in these Olympics that are about to happen, where several women who were not transgendered women, they were cis women, and they had natural hormone levels that were too high to compete. So it's obviously not going to be something that is as easily identifiable as, oh, we go and we pick this hormone and that hormone determines exactly what your athletic ability is. I don't think that that's a real way that we're going to move forward in categorizing this, but let's continue.
The WNBA won't be in business for very long if that's the case.
It would just be, you'd have to find some way to compete people against each other if you still care that sports is an interesting activity.
I guess the area where it does come up in a non-sports area.
Yeah, tell me, I don't know.
So it would be, you talk in your book about the education of children and teaching children about science. And right now, children are being taught about the quote-unquote gender spectrum, which is not scientifically based. That is a theory-based idea.
No, wait, hold on. People express themselves on a spectrum. So you learn that. That's
a social point, not a scientific point.
It's
meaning we express ourselves
hold on.
Based in different languages. Is that something you teach in science class, or is that something that you teach when you're teaching language?
So whether the fact that people want to express themselves on a spectrum, on a gender spectrum, whether that fact is something you want to put in a sociology class or in a science class, maybe that remains to be determined. But
Okay, so I like how he answered that there, and I like how he emphasized the fact part of it. Obviously, he knows that he's talking to Ben Shapiro, big facts over feelings type of guy. But yeah, I mean, I don't even know what Ben Shapiro was talking about there. At least in my experience in high school and elementary school, I didn't learn about the gender spectrum in like my biology class. I didn't even learn about that in any of my science classes as he's talking about. I did learn them in other social science classes and sociology classes, etc., especially in college more so. But I don't even know what he's talking about here, as if they're teaching these things in these other classes, and even if they were, what does it matter? Because as Neil deGrasse Tyson just pointed out there, it's a fact that these are phenomenons that exist within society. Why would we not learn about them? Why are you anti-education, Ben? I mean, it's on its face just completely ridiculous, this weird dichotomy he's trying to put out there.
It is a real fact about real society.
Well, of course, nobody's denying that people identify how they want to identify.
So
the question is, what is the relationship of that to biology? Meaning that the argument is made that trans women are women, for example, and what that seems to mean is that trans women are identical to women. Now, if people want to say trans women are not biological women, obviously that is the case. But people don't seem to want to say that, although that is obviously scientifically true. Trans women are not biological women. Biological women are biological women.
But where are you going with this? What are you trying to accomplish by asking yourself, is it science or is it not science? It's people in society.
But this is a perfect example of an area where suddenly it doesn't matter to say things that are just true. Like, why is it bad or wrong to point out?
I have another way to
It's bad or wrong because you do have a political agenda that is behind it, Ben. Okay, the reason why he hyperfixates on transgendered issues like this and tries to portray it in the way that he does is because he does have an agenda that he's trying to push. And they're about to get into this other comparison with just straight up gay people and how they have been treated historically in this country. But there are consequences to talking about these things in that way by portraying trans people in this country as if they are some sort of like they have a disease or something, or as if they are it's something that should be corrected. Then you start seeing things like with the gay community historically here in the United States, you start seeing things like corrective measures that are then taken by political actors in those ways, with things like shock therapy and conversion therapy camps that gay people have been sent to, and those are horrific things that should have absolutely never happened. And so that's the entire point that Neil deGrasse Tyson is trying to put forward here is, where are you going with this, man? Why are you trying to get into these weird like technical disputes here and language disputes here and all these technicalities? Where are you going with this, Ben? And the answer to that is he knows damn where he's going, and it's in a terrible direction.
Approach this. I care what is objectively true in the world as a scientist. But let me not say even as a scientist. I just simply care what is objectively true. And science happens to be a pretty potent path to invoke, to find out what is true. And so if people express themselves on a gender spectrum, and that is an actual thing in an actual society, if we have not fully explained that scientifically, that's an interesting frontier to study. If you want to say it's only sociological, then it's the purview of the social sciences. I don't care who studies it. It's an interesting fact about society that's worth learning about. To fight someone and say, it's not biological, it's just your this, it's real and it's there.
Well,
because it's real because it manifests.
But it is real because it manifests, but the question of how to classify manifestation is a scientific question, meaning that, for example, there was a woman over at Brown University. She came out with a study that suggested that there was a phenomenon called rapid onset gender dysphoria, in which a member of a particular group would suffer from gender dysphoria, and this person's immediate peer group would suddenly have an onset of gender dysphoria. This paper was so controversial that Brown tried to pull it, and then was forced to reassign it later.
Okay, first of all, Neil is not going to give a great answer to this because he doesn't know the specifics of this study that Ben is referencing here, but it wasn't pulled because there was a lot of controversy around it. It was pulled because it was pretty unscientific in the way that it was conducted. It was basically just, they went to a bunch of parents of transgendered people and asked them, like, their opinions on what could have possibly been the cause of it. And so this is a ridiculous article for him to bring up and try to do a gotcha question here with Neil deGrasse Tyson, but nonetheless, let's continue.
You see this sort of
That's a different question. What you're asking now is, are there some topics that should not be studied scientifically?
Right.
And is there some taboo? And Sam Harris speaks a lot about this.
Yes.
And I think the concern is, if you study some topic that's a hot button topic and you bring scientific methods and tools to it, we don't trust, I'm interpreting here, I think we as a society don't trust that people in charge in a free country won't try to legislate something that will constrict people's freedoms in the face of that information. I think that's the fear.
Well, isn't that...
It's a fear.
I mean, and isn't that...
We don't trust our own ability to govern ourselves in the face of what could be some information relative to other kinds of information.
Isn't that a bit of a problem?
Yes. Yeah. It's not. It means it's not a free society. It's not a society of free inquiry, which I think you need ultimately, but... yeah.
My general take on all of this stuff, from climate change to gender dysphoria to all of these issues, is bring out the science and then let's hash it out. I think that the problem I'm seeing on a lot of sides
is, what is your motivation?
Why does that matter?
It matters because if you have political power, you could end up creating legislation that subtracts freedoms from people who previously were enjoying the same freedoms as you. The history of that exercise
then make a better argument.
Doesn't end well.
But the history of which exercise? Bring out all the science and let's hash it out?
I'm saying if you bring out all the science and the politicians hash it out, the history of that exercise is a recipe for disaster if it involves discoveries that put people's freedom, as defined in our Constitution, at risk.
But now you're arguing for limitations on areas of particular study.
No, I'm arguing on we need a way to protect people's freedoms in the face of whatever gets discovered scientifically.
So I agree. I think that's what the Constitution is for, is to guard rights from...
But we're always fighting people who want rights are always fighting others who are saying they don't get the rights from the Constitution. This is a daily challenge on the progressive left. It is a daily challenge, right? Here's an example. I forgot how I ended up getting this phone call. It was some magazine that serves the gay community. And I remember why, because they wanted my opinion on, they wanted my opinion about whether being gay was biological or mental.
Right, there's that new study that came out, this vast study.
Or psychological.
Right,
okay?
Right.
And I said, I don't care which it is. Find out what it is, fine. But the answer to that question should have no consequence on legislations or laws. Because, for example, suppose it said it's purely biological, okay? Then you say, oh, that explains it. Suppose it says it's purely psychological. What are you going to do now? You say, well, now you're going to go to the reorientation camps or whatever those are called, where they realign you because they say it's psychological rather than biological. All of a sudden, people start behaving in ways in society that want to constrict the freedom of expression of who and what people are. And that is a danger. So maybe there needs to be a line in the sand. Let science do what it does, but politicians keep us free. Yet there's so many politicians that are doing the opposite of that.
So why aren't you a libertarian? I mean,
that scares me.
I'm a libertarian. Come over here. Just
okay.
The line is right here. Just join me over here.
Okay, so listen, he tries to bail himself out there at the end and just say, I'm a libertarian, because Neil deGrasse Tyson basically painted him in a corner there. And listen, this applies to... this applies to a whole different host of other issues as well. I mean, we could just take abortion, for example. So Ben Shapiro obviously does not support abortion or the freedom of choice to act on that decision without the government stepping in and affecting your bodily autonomy as a woman. So these are the types of ways that we should be portraying these arguments to conservatives, because their entire shtick is to appeal to, oh, well, I just care about the Constitution and freedom and democracy, et cetera, et cetera. Meanwhile, if you actually present them their own arguments back to them and use those words and that rhetoric and those ideas against them, then it's pretty easy to completely dismantle their worldview there. Because you saw at the end, Ben Shapiro, he just goes like, well, actually, I'm a libertarian. No, you're not, Ben. You're not a libertarian. Why? Because you want to restrict trans people's freedoms in this country. That's what your agenda is. That's what your entire political agenda is, just like it is with the issue of abortion. Okay? They don't care about the science because they're, they care about the scientific process and want to seek accurate results. They care about weaponizing science. That's what's happening here. He wants to, just like with abortion, he wants to weaponize the science against the issue of abortion, or against women's ability to choose what happens to their own bodies. He is weaponizing science like, oh, a heartbeat starts at this time, when that's a completely disingenuous way to portray the entire situation and the development of an embryo. They weaponize science. They don't care about the actual products of science. So listen, good on Neil deGrasse Tyson for being able to go on Ben Shapiro's show and put up with him squeaking like that for that duration of time. Extremely impressive, nice work. And I'm glad that somebody was able to actually regurgitate these arguments back to Ben Shapiro so that hopefully he can reflect on them. I doubt it. And come to the conclusion that I think all of us have in watching that. He's completely disingenuous. He's a political hack who is not the supposed libertarian who cares about freedoms that he says that he is. And he's also not a facts and a feelings type of guy who puts the science ahead of everything. He's just not.